Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 88 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we're going to break down some Week 16 starts of the week. So for most fantasy leagues, we are off to the fantasy semifinals as we await to see who will be playing for your league championship. And so I think it's important we go through, list off 3 players at each position that I think are going to be really good starts for the week. Last week, we did this episode as well, and we hit on a good majority of those, missed on a couple, and then we had a couple guys get hurt as well, like Woody Marks. But for the most part, pretty solid performance last week. Really the big miss was at tight end with Isaiah Likely, but other than that, pretty good numbers last week. And so we want to keep that up this week with some good recommendations here for starts of the week. So before we get into that, though, as always, make sure you are following this podcast on your platform of choice. We're in everything out there, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, everything, you name it, we're there. And so we don't want you to miss any of our shows in the future, especially as we get into the off season and we start breaking down the rookie class and all that good stuff that comes with the winter and spring following football season. And find us on social media as well. We're at Dynasty War Room on Twitter or X. You can find our Facebook page, and like I mentioned, the YouTube channel at the same handle. And you can find me at Andrew Vcourt. I'll follow you back as well. And find us on Fast Draft. If you use our code, the code there is War Room, all one word, War Room. And you download Fast Draft. You get a full deposit match up to $50. You can get a head start on your off-season best ball drafts with that extra cash, and all sorts of daily fantasy contests as well. And so again, that's Fast Draft using code War Room. And let's just fire it up and get into our starts of the week. So I mentioned that we had a pretty good hit rate last week. So we had Jackson Dart, Jalen Hurts, both hits. And then Matthew Stafford, who was all right against the Lions. And then at running back, Chase Brown, I think, would be qualified as a hit. Woody Marks, kind of incomplete. He had a solid game until he got hurt, scoring that touchdown, but obviously didn't finish the game. Aaron Jones, probably a miss. He didn't do a whole lot last week against the Cowboys defense. So that would be really our only other true miss other than the Isaiah Likely pick. Wide receiver, I think we hit on all of it. Jameson Williams, Terry McLaurin, Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings, and then Harold Fannin Jr., Dalton Schultz, both big hits at tight end, with Likely being the dud. So pretty good hit rate last week. Let's see how we do here for Week 16 and kick things off with the quarterback position. And we'll start with a name that feels almost too big to make this list because, as I mentioned on last week's show, I try not to just pick guys that are number 1 or number 2 at their position during this type of show. I want this to feel a little bit like a confidence play, or guys that are probably in your lineup, but, could be on the border, especially at this point in the year when, the teams that are left have pretty quality lineups. So the lineup decisions get a little bit tougher. And so I'm not going to give you guys like Josh Allen or Christian McCaffrey, Puka Nacua, Trey McBride, etc. But still, some bigger names here. And Joe Burrow is going to be the first one on this list. So Joe Burrow has been pretty awful the past couple weeks. He just hasn't quite looked all the way there. He made those comments about, just not. He didn't seem fully happy, I guess could be the simplest way to put it. He's struggling a bit, both, I think, coming back from injury. The team is not performing that well on the field, so a lot of emotions going on for Joe Burrow. He's getting hit a lot, taking a lot of sacks, but I think this week is a get-right game for the Bengals. So they go on the road to the Miami Dolphins, who are struggling in their own right, and it's going to be nice and warm down there in Miami. And the Dolphins have the 21st ranked defense against opposing quarterbacks, so pretty good matchup, and I fully expect the Bengals to just get back to what they are used to doing, and that is Joe Burrow racking up a bunch of yards and touchdowns. I'm expecting pretty solid performances from everybody on this offense. I would be firing up Chase Brown again. Obviously, you're playing Jamar Chase. I think T. Higgins, if he bounces back from the concussion, you can insert him right back into the lineup. and should be a pretty nice day for Cincinnati against a struggling Miami team that really just got lit up by the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Joe Burrow, I'm here for the bounce back, even in the playoffs where it's you got to hit on these types of starts. And I think if you've taken Joe Burrow this far, as one of your starting quarterbacks, you got to keep him in there, especially in a Superflex league. But even in a one quarterback league, I would have no issue starting Joe Burrow this week in what should be a plus matchup. All right, next at the quarterback position, I'm going to go with Jared Goff. Detroit Lions quarterback. He returns home in the Dome where he gets to take on the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are ranked 25th against opposing fantasy quarterbacks. So an even better matchup here. And the Lions so far this year, and especially under Dan Campbell, whenever they lose a game, they win the following game literally, I think, every single time. I don't think the Lions have lost back-to-back games since they turned the corner into turning into being one of the best teams in the league a few years ago. This is a team that every time they bounce back, they find a way. Now, unfortunately, they have not been able to string together a lot of wins. It's been a lot of back and forth this season, which is why currently they're on the outside looking in. But this is a great matchup for Goff. The Steelers, TJ Watt remains to be seen what his health status is going to be. And it's in Detroit, a game that Detroit has to win to maintain, a spot in the playoff picture. And I think they'll get it done. I think Goff is in line for a big game. I'd be firing up that entire offense as well. And I think they're in for a good day against the Steelers. And last on this list at quarterback is going to be a guy that's probably a bit further down the board for guys you're thinking of playing this week. But if you're in a Superflex league, 2-quarterback Dynasty league, Jacoby Brissett of the Cardinals takes on the Atlanta Falcons this week, who are the 19th ranked defense against fantasy quarterbacks. And Brissett has been allowed to just chuck the ball all over the yard. He is throwing the ball 40 times a game. The Falcons' passing defense is not very good, especially over the latter half of the season. They have struggled a lot more. And I think that this is going to be a high-scoring game between two struggling teams. And Jacoby Brissett is probably going to find Trey McBride for another huge game. We'll talk about Michael Wilson later on in this show, but Arizona, no defense, but they've got a solid offense. They're going to have to keep up in this game, and I fully expect that to happen. And I think you can get a solid 20 points out of Jacoby Brissett. He's been pretty consistent ever since he took over the job this year. He's been somebody that you can play just about every single week. So, the name and the situation obviously is a little bit scary, but he's been solid for fantasy football this year. So I think you can roll him out if need be. Now, don't go crazy. I'm not saying you should be starting him over, some of your other top 10 players. For example, I in a league will be starting Justin Herbert and Bo Nix ahead of Jacoby Brissett. But by no means is that necessarily an easy call. I think that with the way, Justin Herbert's been struggling, it's a bit of an interesting conversation. I think that there are other guys in that range, in that 9 to 12 range that you can make an argument for. So Jacoby Brissett is somebody that if you have to start him, I don't think you should feel bad about it. I think you should actually expect a pretty good game. All right, so let's talk about some running backs. And the running back position this week has a bit of a tough slate. So not an awesome list of matchups. Kind of the same situation as last week where I almost struggled to find 3 names that I really wanted to include. Outside of, the big names where, Bijan Robinson, of course, is going to have a great game, and Jahmyr Gibbs and whatnot. Jonathan Taylor hopefully will bounce back. Christian McCaffrey. Once you get past that top 5 names or so, it gets a little bit harder to find matchups that you truly feel great about, where you just know, okay, boom, this guy's in my lineup, he's going to be great. And so it's a little bit tough. But I do have 3 names here that I like, and I'm going to ride the hot hand with TreVeyon Henderson this week. I think he has shown that he is the more dynamic, complete running back in New England. and he's got those huge breakaway plays that we saw that really help you in fantasy. So I'm firing him up, putting him in every lineup possible against the Ravens this week. And the Ravens, this game will be in Baltimore. They have the 24th ranked defense against opposing running backs. So even though Ramondre Stevenson is going to get some work, Henderson is the more explosive guy. He's going to get work in the passing game. He's going to get opportunities to hit those big plays. And I'm sticking with him despite, the fact that generally you don't want to chase performances, where guys go out and have huge weeks. But I think this is an instance where it's fine. And even if you don't end up with 30-plus points like you did this past week, I think it's very reasonable to expect a nice solid 15-plus from Henderson, and that should put him in line to really help your team out this week. Next up is going to be a guy that sounds a little crazy to have him on this list, but similar bucket as Joe Burrow, and that's going to be Saquon Barkley. So Eagles running back who has been a bit up and down this year, certainly far less consistent and explosive compared to last year's Saquon Barkley. A little bit banged up this week in practice. He got a stinger, so we'll see. Obviously, this pick will depend on his health and the fact that he plays, but assuming he's fine and is out there on the field, he takes on the Washington Commanders in D.C. They have the 27th ranked rush defense against fantasy running backs, and this is just an opportunity where I think Philly is going to take care of this relatively easily. I think they're going to be able to really run the rock and just feed Saquon in this game. It wouldn't shock me if, all the pass catchers have pretty solid days as well. I think Dallas Goedert is probably the one that I like most of, the other big weapons on this team. But should be a nice day for Saquon. Washington's defense stinks. And, we saw what Tyrone Tracy did against them last week. And I would fully expect Saquon to be able to capitalize and do the same. Now the third and final name at running back is going to be Carolina Panthers rusher Rico Dowdle, who takes on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They play this game in Carolina, and Tampa has the 25th ranked defense against opposing fantasy running backs. So Rico Dowdle has lost a little bit of work to Chuba Hubbard over the past couple games, but Dowdle still is the starter. He's still the better running back at this point in time, and I think this is another bounce back opportunity. So couple rough performances, but it's a nice matchup. The 25th ranked defense, like we mentioned, and this just feels like a game in division where Carolina is going to want to pound the rock, run it a million times, and Tampa Bay has been susceptible to the running game so far this year. So Rico Dowdle, the third running back on my list. All right, so let's talk about some wide receivers. My three names here, all guys that have, are coming off of nice games and have been relatively hot as of late. And I think that's something that you really have to look for this time of year is sometimes you have to look past where you drafted a player or their name value or, how good they've been in their career. You got to look about the immediate impact this week in a given start. So sometimes that means benching a guy that you've started for good chunks of the season or that has a big name, but you got to play those matchups. You got to get the guys in that you believe will get it done, right now, because that's all that matters at this point in time when you're in the fantasy playoffs. So Michael Wilson, Arizona Cardinals wide receiver, is the first guy on this list, and this is a bit conditional because the impact that Wilson will have will certainly depend on whether or not Marvin Harrison plays. If he is out for another game, this is a huge smash play for Michael Wilson. He's taken on the Atlanta Falcons in Arizona, and Atlanta has the 25th ranked defense against opposing fantasy wide receivers. So this is a team that you can throw the ball against. I mentioned Jacoby Brissett earlier in the show as a quarterback I like this week. He and Wilson should combine for, another big game. And so even with Marvin Harrison, I think you can absolutely start Michael Wilson. But certainly without Harrison, there are not too many wide receivers that I like better this week than Michael Wilson. Next up is going to be DK Metcalf. So this is a guy that obviously has had the big name, has had a bit of an up and down season, but coming off a nice week, he had that awesome touchdown play where he just threw the Pittsburgh defender to the ground. I think it was Jalen Ramsey even on the play, and just tossed him to the ground, went into the end zone for a touchdown, and he gets the Detroit Lions defense in Detroit in the Dome, and the Lions have the 31st ranked defense against opposing wide receivers. So there is only one team worse than Detroit against wide receivers this year in fantasy, and DK Metcalf is someone that should be able to take advantage of that. I expect this to be a high-scoring game. I expect Pittsburgh to be playing catch-up for a good portion of this game, and that should mean a lot of targets for DK. The Lions are not a team that gives up a ton on the ground. They do have a pretty good rush defense, but their secondary really depleted by injuries, down both safeties, down at corner. So it's going to be a lot of the passing game with Aaron Rodgers this week for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this is a team they can do it against. So in a shootout game like this, especially the fact that it's in Detroit, just makes me feel really good about pretty much all the wide receivers in this game. So you're obviously all, playing St. Brown no matter what, but fire up Jameson Williams, put him in your lineup. We talked Jahmyr Gibbs. I think that, you can play him, even David Montgomery. And then at running back for Pittsburgh, it's actually a little bit more interesting. Do you play Warren coming off of the down game? Kenneth Gainwell has been the hotter hand. I don't particularly love either one this week because, again, I do think that Detroit's rush defense has been pretty solid. But when it comes to the wide receivers, DK Metcalf is the dude, and I would be putting him in your lineup for Week 16. All right, now the final wide receiver. This came down to Ladd McConkey versus Courtland Sutton for me as to who to include. But I thought of it myself when I was looking through sleepers rankings and projections and whatnot. And, they have Ladd McConkey projected to outscore Courtland Sutton. And I thought to myself, well, okay, but who would I actually play in my lineup? And I looked at it and I would start Sutton. So that's who I went with here is Courtland Sutton, Denver Broncos wide receiver, coming off of a huge game this past week against Green Bay. And he gets the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are 20th against opposing wide receivers in fantasy this year. So pretty solid matchup. The Jacksonville Jaguars are coming off of a huge game of their own. Lots of passing. So there's a decent chance that this could be a pretty high-scoring game between these two teams. But either way, I like the situation. Jacksonville, there's a huge game for Jacksonville and for Denver in terms of playoff seeding and, divisional races and that kind of thing. And so I expect this to be a highly competitive game with a pretty ample amount of points. And Courtland Sutton has really picked things up over the last few weeks. He's gotten a ton of targets, and I would expect that to continue. And for that reason, I'll be starting Courtland Sutton everywhere I can. All right, so the tight end position. This, again, we talked about with TreVeyon Henderson, the idea of riding the wave and riding the hot hand, but also trying not to chase points based on last week's performance. But I'm going to do it here at tight end with Kyle Pitts. So Kyle Pitts was the huge winner last week. He saved or boosted tons of fantasy teams last week for those people bold enough to start him. And he destroyed the opposing defense and went off for, depending on your league scoring, somewhere around 50 points. And so Kyle Pitts this week gets the Arizona Cardinals in Phoenix. And the Cardinals have the 25th ranked defense against opposing tight ends. And we don't know yet what the pass catcher situation is going to be for Atlanta. Does Drake London come back or not? We are not clear yet. But either way, I think you can absolutely start Kyle Pitts. I think he's in line for another huge game. I expect there to be a lot of points. That's one of those things that we're looking for is find those matchups with a lot of scoring. And this should be one of them. So Kyle Pitts, put him right back in that lineup. He saved you last week. You might as well ride him out and see what he can do for you here over the final couple of weeks. But I certainly have the confidence to be playing him, and I'm not all that worried about a huge drop off to just an unplayable game here. I think you're still going to get double digits, and especially if he can get in the end zone, you should be in line for a really nice week. Next up is Colby Parkinson from the LA Rams, and he takes on the Seattle Seahawks in Seattle, Thursday night game. And the Seahawks have the 27th ranked defense against tight ends. So great matchup. Devontae Adams, unlikely to play in this game. And that means that Colby Parkinson is pretty much the number 2 option in this offense. And the Rams just love to throw the ball. And this should be a very close game. It's an extremely important game for the divisional race and playoff seeding and whatnot in the NFC West. So Matt Stafford loves to get the ball spread around to his receivers, and Parkinson has been awesome. He's been very startable since he, took over the job fully and has been healthy. So keep it up. He's given you a reason to start him. You might as well just keep him right there in your lineup. Trust the matchup. And I know Seattle has a good defense overall, but their weak spot has been the tight end position. And Parkinson, torched the Lions for a big game, and I think he'll give you good startable numbers again this week against Seattle. And last but not least, we're going to go with George Kittle from the San Francisco 49ers. He takes on the Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis in the Dome. The Colts are the 23rd ranked defense against opposing tight ends. And this almost feels like a bit of a cop-out because I think George Kittle is a good enough player that he probably is one of the top 3 or 4 guys at the position from a redraft perspective. And he has such a nice matchup this week. The Colts have been relatively mediocre against the tight end position, and there's questions about whether Ricky Pearsall is going to be able to play due to his re-injury. And I just feel great about George Kittle. He's been awesome the last few weeks, and there's no reason that he shouldn't go be great again. So if for any reason you are doubting about whether or not you should play George Kittle, don't. Keep him in your lineup. Whether that's as your lone tight end, whether that's as a flex position in a super flex league, even if it's without tight end premium, I think you can still play him 100% as a flex if he's not already your tight end 1. So, but certainly in a tight end premium league. So George Kittle on the list as a Week 16 start of the week. So there we have it. That's our list for this week. At quarterback, Joe Burrow, Jared Goff, Jacoby Brissett. At running back, Travion Henderson, Saquon Barkley, and Rico Dowdle. At wide receiver, Michael Wilson, DK Metcalf, and Cortland Sutton. And at tight end, Kyle Pitts, Colby Parkinson, and George Kittle. So thank you all very much for tuning in. We should be back next week with one final regular season episode where we'll talk about some Week 17 championship week starts of the week. And I imagine we're going to push that show out a little bit earlier given the holidays. So the goal will be to have that episode published on Tuesday morning of next week. So that's the plan. And we'll see how things go. If for some reason there is no episode, things got busy with the holidays, I'll be posting about it over on social media. So again, go find our Twitter page at Dynasty War Room. That's where you'll get some show updates. And then after the regular season, we'll be taking a bit of a break, a couple weeks off to celebrate Christmas and New Year's and all that good stuff. And then we'll be back and ready to go in January with some fun off-season content, wrapping up the fantasy season and looking ahead to what's next. So stay tuned for all that, and follow the show on both social media and on your platform of choice so you don't miss those shows. And we'll be back with all kinds of good stuff. So thank you all very much for tuning in. My name is Andrew Valancourt, and you have been listening to the Dynasty War Room podcast.